Italy and Norway are beginning to look at easing their lockdowns after Denmark and Austria became the first two European countries to loosen restrictions, a sign that the worst of the pandemic could be coming to an end for the region.
Italy, the original epicenter of the outbreak on the continent, has begun to plan for emerging from the lockdown as new deaths and cases flatten out. Selected firms could open in mid-April, according to an official familiar with the discussions. Norway may also move to ease restrictions, with a press briefing scheduled later on Tuesday.
Parts of Italy's agribusiness and health sectors, and mechanical equipment companies linked to these industries, could be allowed to restart operations, but protection for workers will be critical for each company involved, said the person who asked not to be identified discussing confidential talks.
After weeks of measures designed to limit contact between people, European governments are seeing growing evidence that shutting down much of modern life is containing the disease. But the scale of the outbreak in the region means officials need to weigh any attempts to restart parts of the economy against the risk of reigniting the spread.
The difficulty of containing the contagion was underscored by Spain's latest figures. Despite weeks of severe restrictions on public life, Europe's hardest-hit country reported an increase in its daily coronavirus death toll and a bigger rise in the number of confirmed cases.
There were 5,478 new infections in the 24 hours through Tuesday, the highest since Sunday, and taking the total to 140,510, according to Health Ministry data. The death toll rose by 743 to 13,798, a larger gain than Monday's 637. Still, the number of new fatalities was lower than every day last week.
Europe has been hit hard by the pandemic that started in China and spread across the world. Italy, Spain, Germany and France trail only the US in the number of infections, and the region has suffered more than 60% of worldwide deaths.
Denmark will press ahead with a cautious reopening, starting with daycare and primary schools on April 15 if the virus numbers remain stable, Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said Monday evening. The government will also start talks with business leaders on gradually moving employees back into offices, but some restrictions will remain in place for months to come.
We've managed to avoid the misfortune that has befallen a number of other countries, because we acted early, Frederiksen said.
Denmark and Austria were among the first countries in Europe to shut down public life in response to the COVID-19 outbreak. Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz earlier Monday announced the first steps to restart his country's economy, with small shops, hardware and gardening stores allowed to reopen after Easter, to be followed by the opening of all retailers from May 1.
The easing of restrictions came as the tally of sick and dead showed further signs of abating across the continent. In Germany, which has the third largest outbreak in Europe, the number of daily recoveries exceeded new cases for the first time on Tuesday.
While French infections continue to level off, Paris will ban outings for individual sports activities between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. starting Wednesday, and Health Minister Olivier Véran said the epidemic hasn't reached its peak yet in the country.
French authorities fear that easing restrictions or setting an end date for confinement measures will prompt people to infringe on the rules or at least be less vigilant, thus threatening to rekindle the epidemic.
In Italy, if new cases and fatalities continue to slow, early May could see a fewer social restrictions, the official said, with some shops reopening but bars and restaurants remaining closed. Social distancing rules will remain. Health Minister Roberto Speranza has urged conditions for coexisting with the virus in coming months. These include research on a vaccine and therapy, tests to map who is immune, ensuring that people with light virus symptoms are treated at home rather than in hospitals to avoid contagion, and a new app to help track an infected person's recent contacts. The most recent decree by Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte's government set April 13 as the final day of the lockdown, but new measures will probably be considered between Friday and Saturday. Most Italians will have to be patient. Depending on how the contagion evolves, early May could be the time to start allowing people to venture out, said Fabrizio Preliosco, a virologist at Milan University. But we'll have to stick to social distancing rules, and to stopping people from forming groups. And the more we wear masks, the better. Read more on how Wuhan is emerging from lockdown.
For all the encouraging signs in Europe, the grim toll of virus victims continues to rise around the world, with U.S. deaths passing 10,000 and Japan preparing to declare a state of emergency in 7 prefectures including Tokyo as soon as Tuesday. The World Health Organization added to the note of caution, warning against lifting containment measures completely.
Chancellor Angela Merkel, who ended a 12-day period of self-quarantine on Friday, joined the calls for prudence. While Germany has moved forward in efforts to slow the spread of the virus, it's still too early to issue a timeframe for easing the restrictions on Europe's biggest economy, she said.
In Germany, some 7,381 people recovered from the illness in 24 hours, compared with 3,252 new cases, the lowest growth in infections in 2 weeks, according to data from Johns Hopkins University on Tuesday. As a grim reminder of the risks, 226 people died over the past 24 hours, the highest daily toll for the country.
We have always said that we will decide after Easter when we have clarity on the number of new infections and recoveries, Economy Minister Peter Altmaier said Tuesday in an interview with ZDF television. We need to hold our nerve.
Denmark and Austria are getting out in front with tentative steps to ease the restrictions. Still, curbs on daily life will remain. In Denmark, restrictions on crowds larger than 10 people are to be extended as are border closures.
In Vienna, Chancellor Kurz, who delivered his remarks from behind a protective screen while wearing a face mask, said that social distancing rules will still apply at least until the end of April.
Just because the numbers retreat, the danger isn't gone, he said.
With assistance by Boris Grondahl, Maria Jose Vera, Patrick Donahue, Birgit Jennen, and William Horrobin.